What is the scariest trust your gut feeling you felt before and glad you did so? Story 1. I had to leave for an appointment, and for some reason, I felt the urge to just sit in my car before leaving. I sat there just looking around for 2 minutes or so. Then the feeling went away and I left. When I was on the highway, I saw a crash that had happened just minutes before I was supposed to be there. A truck blew a tire, hit other cars, which hit more cars as well. It was a mess. 2 people died. A few others were seriously injured and taken to the hospital. I was stuck in traffic behind the scene for about 2 hours and was so glad I had just sat in my car staring around before leaving. I still do that sometimes, thinking back to that moment. Story 2. Oh man, it's my time to shine. Former grain elevator operator here. Corn and soybeans kick up a lot of dust. If you've ever watched a farmer harvesting in the field and seen the combines driving, you'll have seen all the dust being kicked up. Lots of flecks of bean pods and corn husks, etc. After harvesting, they come to the elevator to drop it all off. We then dry the corn down with a massive grain dryer. This allows it to be stored long-term without going bad. This drying process in turn creates even more dust. As the corn is blasted with hot air, the corn turns hard and brittle. A significant portion of it crumbles apart into dust. If you ever reached your hand into a pile of dried corn, you could easily see the corn flour sifting apart from the whole corn kernels. In the massive grain storage bins, this dust is just floating everywhere in the air over the corn. Any source of heat can cause it to ignite. Where I worked, they did a safety demonstration every year where a guy would come out with his clear plastic box and stir up some corn dust in it, close the lid, and use a stove igniter plugged into the box. Boom, lid would blow open. Same concept, except on a much greater scale. And once that flame front gets going, it travels up through the top entrance in the bin, through the conveyors to the other bins and the entire system. We had one happen in one of our elevators my last year working there. Luckily, no one was there. It happened after everyone had left for the day, but it was captured on camera and it was intense. You could see where the explosion exited the top of the elevator as the panel on the side of it was bent in half but still hanging on by the catch chain. Blew all the bolts out, and that was a minor explosion. The main elevator I worked at had exploded 15 years prior to me working there. That one was bad, had to rebuild the entire structure. But anyways, I got too long-winded. Heat can occur in these bins when wet grain, whether soybeans or corn, starts rotting just like in a compost bin. What happens in compost bins with a lot of good material? They heat up, you could have hot spots in your bin, and they can get so hot that it literally just starts on fire. It could be 75 degrees outside, but your temperature cables reaching into the grain could say you have a hot spot of 120 degrees. That's a bad situation. Or your aeration fans could have a bearing go out and heat up, sending sparks into the grain. A conveyor could do the same thing, equipment failures, etc. Story 3. Not sure if it qualifies, but I used to live and work in the suburbs. One evening I was driving home at dusk. I was 18 and 19 and had the house to myself. My brother was out of town and my mom was at her parents' place. My job was about 10 miles from my house and maybe 6 turns on decently sized roads. I'm a fairly observant person, and it wouldn't be odd for the same car to be behind me for half of those turns. But this time, a car followed me all the way to my residential street. I got a gut feeling I was being followed, so I passed my house and turned left. My house was one over from the corner of another residential street that was a quarter-mile loop with another small street in it that reconnected to the loop and then back to my street. This car followed me as I made a loop. I then turned right to restart the loop, and it followed me again. This time I turned down the small street and completed the loop again. It followed me one more time. As I was about to make the loop for the 4th time, they finally drove off. I drove around another 5 minutes just to make sure they didn't circle back, as I had nowhere else to park except out front of my house. But I was creeped out the rest of the night. I slept with my door locked and barricaded, and with a big kitchen knife. I have no idea if or why they followed me. I don't know if it was a friend pranking me or if my brother put one of his friends up to it, since it's the only time that's ever happened and it was quite coincidental that I was alone. I worked retail, and some of the employees did have records, so I just don't know. Story 4. I noticed pain in my lower back one morning and thought I had slept on it wrong or something. Throughout the day, it continued and started to feel like when you get kicked in the groin. I thought to myself, it's probably cancer. I did a self-check and didn't think I noticed anything, and had my girlfriend do the same, and she wasn't sure either. I called a urology office based on a gut feeling and got the last appointment before the Christmas break. It was cancer, but it was super early. I had an orchiectomy a few days later, then some mild chemo a few months later, and have been just fine ever since. Edit for more information, because this got a lot of attention. I had noticed some similar pain that lasted a weekend or so, a month before the pain that sent me to the doctor. The doctor was very kind, considering I walked into his office and said, "I think I have cancer." He and a fellow both did a gloved, hands-on exam of both testicles. They decided to do an ultrasound on both testicles at the same exam. They showed me both images, and there was a huge difference between the normal and irregular. The next step was surgery to remove the affected testicle, which is called an orchiectomy. It was scheduled for 3 days later, with the same doctor in an outpatient surgery center attached to their building. Surgery went well, and then I was kind of in limbo for a few months. The urologist recommended radiation therapy. I talked to a radiation oncologist who recommended chemotherapy. I then talked to a chemotherapy oncologist who recommended observation with the urologist. I had a follow-up with all three and finally decided to do 2 rounds of carboplatin at a moderately high dose over a short period. I shaved my head into a mohawk expecting to lose my hair, but I didn't and just ended up looking ridiculous. I had some medical debt and stupidly paid that off over my student loans, which messed up my credit for a while. But the experience made me realize how caring, kind, and amazing my girlfriend at the time was. And we've been together ever since, married for 7 years now. Story 5. When I was pregnant, I got bit by a Lyme tick at 28 weeks. I noticed the bullseye and got on antibiotics. My OB/GYN brushed it off after that. No harm done, according to her. When I went to the hospital at 35 weeks to register for delivery, normal procedure here, I mentioned the Lyme disease but also said I had taken antibiotics. The next day they called me and said they wanted to induce at 37 weeks because Lyme disease can damage the placenta, and they didn't want to take the risk. Oof, I talked to my OB/GYN about it, and she basically laughed it off, telling me not to induce. My gut instinct told me to go ahead, so I followed the hospital's advice and had my son at 37 weeks. He was tiny, and it was a tough few weeks after that, getting him to eat and everything, because he was so small and tired. The hospital sent the placenta to pathology. It was severely damaged and wouldn't have held up much longer. If I had listened to my OB/GYN, I probably would have lost my son. Needless to say, I switched OB/GYNs after that. Story 6. Back in the days of MySpace, a girl I knew through high school extracurriculars posted a vague warning about an active duty sailor she had met online. He seemed normal at first, but then suddenly wouldn't take no for an answer. I messaged her to ask if she was okay, and she told me his name, warning me not to engage if he ever tried to contact me. She mentioned she had been deleting some of her photos and profile details because she genuinely thought he might try to show up where she worked, or even at our shared after-school activity. Literally the following week, I showed up for that extracurricular and was setting up with a few other people. The girl was in the women's restroom, down a long, dark, isolated hallway, far removed from the main entrance. Out of nowhere, a guy who looked high school-aged in face and build, enough to blend in with us, showed up and began looking around like he knew the place and exactly what he was there for. I was used to kids around my age dropping by out of curiosity, but they'd usually stand around awkwardly until approached. This guy's level of focus was extremely unsettling, and I got the strongest feeling that I needed to warn the girl and alert an adult. I already knew I didn't want to talk to him, so I glanced at the sign-in sheet by the entrance. It was him, the guy she had warned me about. As soon as I was sure he hadn't noticed where I was headed, I rushed down the hallway to the women's restroom and told her what I saw and how I knew it was him. She started crying uncontrollably. I told her to lock the door and that I was going to get the adults as soon as I could find them. I then found 2 staff members and told them everything. The guy in question was still in the next room, and the girl had locked herself in the bathroom. I was only 15. I don't know how I stayed so calm. The adults acted fast, escorted the guy off the premises, and filed a police report. Story 7. This isn't my feeling, but my mom's. A few weeks ago, she works near me and also lives near me, and she was heading home at lunch to meet a plumber. She offered to drive me to my house so I could let my dog out. I normally take the bus to work and then back home for lunch and again to work. So the plan was for her to drop me off so I could walk my dog a bit longer and then I'd take the bus back. But when we got to my house, she said she felt like she should just drive me back to work real quick. It's only a 10-minute drive, and then go meet the plumber. On our way back, we saw ambulances and police cars heading toward my neighborhood. I pulled up the police scanner, and we realized there had been a shooting at my bus stop at the exact time I would have been waiting there to go back to work. Story 8. When I was in kindergarten, I walked home with my fourth grade sister and her best friend. It looked like it was going to rain when we were dismissed. My sister said she wished someone could come pick us up. I had brought my little pull-along toy phone for show and tell. I said I would call Mom, and my sister and her friend joked that they wished it would actually work. But it wouldn't. My mom would only leave work if it was a real emergency. Rain didn't count. We hadn't made it even half a mile from school when the sky opened up with hail, thunder, and lightning. We had to take shelter on someone's porch as the storm raged. It didn't look like it would let up, and we eventually decided to just make a run for it. We had just jumped off the porch when my mom's car turned onto the road. She had gotten a strange feeling and told her boss she really needed to pick us up. He told her to go. She took us home and went right back to work. It wasn't like we hadn't walked home in storms before, so it was weird how it almost felt like my pretend phone call worked. Story 9. I was driving on a very remote road in rural Australia. No streetlights, dead straight, pitch black, and no other people for over 100 kilometers. It was between Burketown and Julia Creek in far north Queensland. The song Can't Stop by the Red Hot Chili Peppers was playing, and it repeated the word stop 3 times halfway through. I thought, strange for Bluetooth to glitch after working perfectly for the last 8 hours. But as I finished that thought, I had a feeling there was something more to it. So I slowed down. I must have gotten to about 60 km/h when a herd of donkeys wandered onto the road. If I had been going 120 km/h, I would have hit them, no doubt, and it likely would have been a serious accident. I was going just slow enough to navigate through them and had to swerve onto the side of the road, which was just dirt. Any faster, and the car would have skidded and possibly rolled. No cell phone signal, and literally no one else around. Every time I hear that song, especially where it repeated, I get a wicked shiver and think about how differently things could have ended. Story 10. I nearly became the initial target of a serial predator masquerading as a police officer. The entire night had already been unpleasant. It all began with being shouted at for refusing to smoke in the presence of a child. My mom believed I was being overly judgmental. I mean, she wasn't entirely wrong, but it was illegal at the time, and I didn't want to be using anything around their toddler. Later, the husband cornered me and attempted to kiss me, and I thought, I'm out of here. I'm going home. I was walking home when a guy pulled over and asked if I needed a ride. I started backing away from his car and said no, I was fine. Then he pulled out a badge and said he was a cop. I had a big bag of weed in my pocket, so I repeated that I was good. I ended up walking the long way home just to make sure I wasn't being followed. Oddly enough, it was a friend of my mom's who helped catch him. He had been pulling women over, pretending to be a cop, and assaulted several people. My mom's friend worked with real law enforcement and knew the actual officers, so when he tried to stop her, she knew something was wrong. I didn't realize who I had been dealing with until a news article came out about him. I'm so glad I have a personal rule to never get close enough to someone's car to be within arm's reach. I always keep a safe distance, far enough that even if someone opens a door and leans out, they still can't reach me. Story 11. I'm adopted by the least maternal woman you could imagine. She never had her own kids but fostered dozens, eventually focusing on pre-adoptive babies. The baby in this story was only our third. Just 2 years earlier, I had to show my mom how to change a diaper and fasten a baby onesie. She really was that clueless, or was she? One Monday, she said the baby was ill and took her to the doctor. They said the baby was fine. Tuesday, same thing, same result. Wednesday again. But this time, one of the baby's eyes was glued shut. The doctor gave antibiotics and diagnosed an eye infection. Thursday, she went back again. No new info. Same on Friday. The baby was very quiet though, and I felt like my mom was on to something. Saturday came, and for some reason, Dad was at work. Mom woke me up and said she was going to the emergency doctor and needed me to go with her. I helped her pack for a one-night hospital stay and booked a taxi. Serious business, since taxis were forbidden because we had legs. The baby's eye had now turned into what looked like a big purple bruise, and Mom was scared she'd get blamed, I reassured her. She had doctor's notes to prove she'd been concerned all week. No one had hurt the baby, something else was going on. We got to the doctor's office and he called us in. We didn't say a single word. He picked up the phone, dialed emergency services, and said it was life or death. Then he slammed down the receiver, he got up, left the room, and came back with the receptionist. He looked at my mom and said, "Sorry, but time is of the essence. I called for an ambulance, but they're too busy, so the receptionist will drive you to the hospital in my car. Someone will be waiting when you get there." Then to the receptionist, he said, "Ignore red lights, put your foot down. If the police see you, keep going. Do not stop." I didn't go to the hospital. I went home to tell my dad what had happened and to take care of my siblings. I fetched my grandparents and called Dad at work, told him to go straight to the hospital and that everything at home was okay. He got home at 9 p.m. without Mom or the baby. He said he was too tired to explain and would talk in the morning. He thanked me for helping. Next day, Dad visited Mom in the hospital, but we weren't allowed to go. When he got back, he told us, "Your mother saved the baby's life. Not even I knew something was wrong, but she did." Turns out the bruise wasn't a bruise at all. It was septicemia. The baby had developed bacterial meningitis. I was shocked. A woman not exactly known for being nurturing had sensed something fatal nearly a week before it got serious. Mom and the baby spent 8 days in the hospital. The baby came home like nothing ever happened. I don't like my mom for a lot of reasons, but I admire her for many things. Saving a baby's life isn't even the most impressive one. Story 12. I wanted to talk to a professor about an essay I was writing. I knew her office hours were open. I had just chatted with friends and had good grades. It was the start of a new term, and even the weather was nice for fall, I thought. Whatever. I'll just grab a snack from the student store. I walked in, opened a cup noodles R, not sponsored, and filled it with hot water. While paying at the counter, a student burst in, crying, breathless, and frantic. She said to call the police, that there was an active shooter. We hid in a supply closet near the snacks and textbooks with at least 6 others. The student explained what was happening. There was a rampage happening in the same building I was about to go to. My professor was meeting with a student, and I would have been waiting right outside, exactly where part of the rampage took place. At least 9 people died that day, including someone I had grown up with. If it weren't for my gut literally feeling empty and me thinking, "Screw it," I would have had a front row seat to a tragedy. Story 13. Not me, but my daughter. We were at the mall and had just arrived at the food court. My daughter, 24, suddenly got agitated and said, "We have to leave. We have to leave now." I thought she was going to be sick and told her to head to the car. I said I'd grab her siblings some food and meet her shortly. But she looked terrified and repeated, "No, we have to go now." I had no idea what was going on, but we quickly left. We were still in the parking lot 10 minutes later, stuck in traffic, when several police cars arrived with sirens blaring. We found out later that a gang fight had broken out in the food court, where we had just been. A dozen people were arrested. We still have no idea what she picked up on. There were no raised voices, no signs of a group gathering, no one acting strangely, just regular people getting lunch. But somehow, she knew something was about to happen. Story 14. There was a guy I went to community college with back in 2014 to 2016. Let's call him Mark. He was a few years older than me and, if I remember right, was studying political science. We had mutual friends, and I'd see him at parties or hangouts. Can't say he gave me the creeps immediately, but something always felt off. Ironically, he was surprisingly charismatic and didn't have trouble with women, even though he wasn't particularly good looking. One time at a hangout, we were talking. and I said something that made him stop and stare at me. I stared back thinking it was a joke, but then I noticed there was just nothing behind his eyes, like looking into black holes. It shook me. He was very intelligent too, and honestly, I'm ashamed to say we got along for a while. But I could only take him in small doses and kept him at a distance until I found out who he really was. Apparently, years before we ended up at the same college, he was living in some kind of communal house where he threw a party and assaulted a woman. I found out through a close friend who was there and had been beaten unconscious by others when he tried to intervene. That same friend told me Mark had done psychedelics in the desert shortly before that incident and came back, changed. After learning this, I cut all contact. Then a few years ago, I heard from mutual friends that he had a psychotic break, killed his mother, and dumped her body in a local lake. It made the local news. He's now committed to a state mental institution for life. Story 15. Last March, before my father passed away, I called my mom to see if she had received a text message I had sent after not speaking to her for almost a year. Something had told me to call her, and when I did, she told me she was on the way to the hospital because my father had a heart attack while speaking to a doctor at urgent care, and then another one in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Later that night, we found out that he had suffered a heart attack 2 weeks prior, around Valentine's Day. What's strange is that around that time, both my brother and I had started having really bad chest pains. It got so bad that I told my husband I was about to go to the ER and not wait for my scheduled appointment the following week. We also learned that my father had congestive heart failure, a blood clot in his right lung, and 2 clots in his heart. Sadly, he passed away less than 2 months after we discovered all of this. After his passing, his cardiologist told my mother that he had a genetic heart condition that my siblings and I now need to be tested for. I now see the same cardiologist my dad had, and it's heartbreaking going into that office knowing he was once there too. Story 16. When I was about 15, I was walking home after dark with my high school boyfriend. As we crossed an intersection in the neighborhood behind my house, there were 3 guys walking toward us from the left. About 20 seconds after we passed them, I suddenly felt the urge to look behind us. I noticed that the guys had vanished. They never crossed the intersection they were heading toward. When I scanned the area, I saw someone facing me, who then quickly stepped behind a tree. My boyfriend and I immediately took off, cutting through yards until we made it back to my house. When we peeked out the back door to see if they had followed us, we saw them in my neighbor's yard, literally beating the bushes as if they thought we were hiding there. I called the police. When one of the officers came back to report what they found, he said they located the group but claimed they just thought you were pretty and wanted to know where you lived. I couldn't believe it. The police let them go, calling it innocent, right? Because people search through bushes at night just to find out where someone lives. I'm so thankful I looked behind me that night. Story 17. I'm a practicing lawyer in Islamabad, Pakistan. Back in 2014, the country was experiencing frequent terrorist attacks due to its involvement in the fight against terrorism. One morning, after court, I returned to a small office we had on the premises and was chatting with colleagues when gunfire erupted. Some of the junior lawyers tried to go see what was happening, but I urged them to stay inside and bolted the door behind us. The doors and walls were made of glass, and the gunfire continued for what felt like 10 minutes, though it felt like forever. We assumed it was a violent dispute between 2 parties in a case and didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. As the shooting intensified, I recited a prayer, mentally preparing myself for the worst, that a shooter would appear in front of our glass doors and fire. Suddenly, bullets struck the rear wall of our building, revealing the direction of the gunfire. I quickly consulted with a colleague, then sprang into action. I opened the door, directed everyone outside, and pointed to where I wanted them to run. As the last one to leave, I turned and saw the shooter following us. Just as he was about to line up a shot, a special forces unit stationed on the roof fired and struck him in the chest. The attacker was wearing a Suic vest. Realizing he was done, he pulled the cord. I saw a human body explode. Something I will never forget. In a panic, not knowing if more attackers were around, we kept running until the courthouse buildings were out of sight. 14 people died that day and dozens were injured. Days later, we visited the scene. There was a crater where the attacker had detonated, right next to where I had stood, holding the door open. If we hadn't trusted our instincts and fled, we wouldn't be alive. I'll never forget that day. Story 18. Back in high school, we had two art teachers, Mr. O and Mr. S. Mr. S was the cool one. Everyone loved him. His classes allowed for more advanced projects, and he genuinely seemed like a great person. I had him for multiple years and considered him my favorite teacher. I was vice president of the art club and was specifically asked to look out for his son when he started school as a freshman. I was one of the few students allowed in his classroom during lunch and before school. I was very close to him, but so were many others. Even former students who had graduated years earlier would come back to visit, chat, or play chess. I had planned to do the same after graduation. Mr. O was different but likable in his own way. I had known his son when we were younger, and I was one of the only students who actually paid attention in his class. One day after class, he asked me to help teach a concept to freshmen. We started talking about my classes, and he eventually brought up Mr. S. He said, "You know, I'm really not one for gossip, but please be careful around him. There's just something not right with him." That caught me completely off guard. Mr. O was the last person I would have expected to say something negative about a colleague, especially to a student. But I could tell he meant it, so I took it seriously, even though I brushed it off at the time. A few months after I graduated, I learned that Mr. S had been arrested for multiple counts of coercion and inappropriate conduct with a minor. For years, he had manipulated his young nephew in exchange for unspeakable favors. His own daughter, still in middle school, found out and reported him. It still stuns me that Mr. O was right all along. It deeply hurts to know I was so close to someone doing such awful things. What makes it worse is that Mr. S left our high school that year to go teach at an elementary school in another part of the state. Right before getting caught, I still haven't fully processed how someone I trusted so much could hide something so terrible. Story 19. I was helping my friend move into a new apartment with her fiancé. We worked together, and at the time she came into my office asking me to go with them to a furniture store. So I said yes. Right before we were leaving, I had this really bad gut feeling. I didn't know what it was, but I was exhausted, so I chalked it up to just that. About an hour later, I was in my living room on my phone with all the windows open. The electricity was cut off, which is normal in our country. When a huge explosion ripped through the city, I flew off my couch, hit my face on the granite tabletop, and chipped my tooth. I was disoriented for a few minutes when another explosion occurred. I looked outside the window. Every single window in every building in my vicinity was shattered into a million pieces. I started looking for signs of what had happened and saw a massive cloud coming from the site of the explosion. I knew my friend and her fiancé were nearby. The phone lines were down, people were panicking, and there were police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks everywhere. They both got badly injured, but thankfully, they survived. Had I gone with them, I probably would have gotten injured too. Or worse, thank God I was so exhausted that day. And thank God the electricity was out, and I had opened the windows. Otherwise, the glass from the window, which surprisingly didn't break, could have killed me. All the other windows shattered. Story 20. A couple of years back, during a messy breakup, I had tried and failed, LOL, to amicably retrieve my stuff. My father and cousin volunteered to drive me to my ex's place to get my belongings. Everything was set, 6 p.m., straight after work. We were going to pull up to his house with a cop to help de-escalate things just in case. I'll never forget how upset my dad was and how determined he was to get my things back, even though I was ready to let it go. Something about it all felt off. The day came. 10 minutes before I was supposed to leave the house, my dad walked in, calm but visibly unsettled, and said, "Let it go. Let him have your things. Let him have his way. This isn't worth it. You're worth more than those things." I was so confused and tried to insist, but he stood firm. "No one is going anywhere. Don't ever go back there. Let it go. Move on." Years later, about 3 years after the fact, I found out through a now deleted chaotic voice note from my ex that he had hacked my phone and knew I would be driving by that day. He was leaving the country for university, and his new girlfriend had pretended to leave him after finding out about me. He was not in a good state of mind. He left work early that day, picked up his dad's gun, loaded it, and was waiting for me to show up. But I never did, he claimed. Haha, I was just kidding. I would never. I asked my dad why we never went, and he always just says he felt a sense of dread in his gut. He didn't know why, but now I do. Story 21. This happened when I was 9. My cousin, who was 7 at the time, came over to play. My dad had to leave to buy groceries while my mom was sleeping upstairs. We were told not to leave the house and just play inside. But being kids, we went outside to the playground anyway. The neighborhood was quiet and empty that day. It was gloomy, cold, and windy. Most of the neighborhood was probably napping. My cousin and I were playing when a blue truck pulled up and 2 guys inside started staring at us. I slowly packed up our toys and whispered to my cousin to run with me if anything happened. Then one of the guys got out and started asking us questions about the neighborhood. As he was talking, I picked up the last toy, ready to bolt. Thankfully, from a distance, I saw my dad pulling into the neighborhood. He immediately stopped and told us to get in the house before the 2 men could do anything. We ran home as fast as we could. When we got to the garage, my dad gave me a very deserved scolding. As he lectured me, I made eye contact with the 2 men as they drove past our house. For a week straight, I was paranoid they would break in or try to kidnap me because they saw where I lived. Thankfully, nothing happened after that. I'm convinced those men were kidnappers. They had no reason to be there and asked vague questions like how nice the neighborhood was. It felt like a trap to gain our trust. That year, there was a spike in kidnappings across the country. A girl around my age in a different state was abducted under similar circumstances and is still missing to this day. That day was a mix of gut instinct and the immaculate timing of my dad's arrival. It really felt like someone was watching over us. Story 22. There have been a couple of times when trusting my gut saved me. Once was in high school. I had started experimenting with LSD and really liked it. Still do, actually, but I don't partake often now. Anyway, I had a vial with about 50 doses, and there was a rave that night. I'd gotten a dozen calls confirming I'd be there. Obviously, I said yes. But just as I was about to leave the house, something told me not to go. I listened, I went back to my room, turned off my phone, and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to over 200 messages. The narcotics department had raided the rave and arrested a lot of people, even for just having a joint or 2. If I'd gone, it would have ruined my life. I stopped selling that day and now only share with close friends. Another time, a few years later, my girlfriend and I were on holiday in Croatia. A friend of hers joined us. They're both really small, maybe 5 feet tall and 40 kilograms, so I'm always cautious when we're out, especially in a new country where I don't speak the language. We were in Split, bar hopping. When we met some locals, we were doing shots, and something told me to start switching drinks with the girls, just in case. That instinct was right. The drinks had been spiked. I don't know if it was meant for me or them, but my girlfriend, who can usually handle her alcohol, was suddenly blackout drunk. It hit her later, at another bar. Around that time, I noticed one of the same locals from earlier. Something about him felt off. He invited us to a party at his place. I was high, so I almost said yes. Then I noticed some huge guys nearby who looked like they were following us. My instincts screamed at me to act. I told the girls in our native language to go to the restroom. I told the guy I'd meet him in a minute and followed them. Once we were out of sight, I told them we had to leave. Now I had to carry my girlfriend out. We couldn't find a cab, so we just kept walking. I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts. But I've learned one thing. Never ignore that voice. Story 23. My mother-in-law got a new boyfriend. He had tons of stories about his wealth and his amazing job as an underwater welder. Everyone liked him, except me and my partner. We couldn't put our finger on it, but something felt off. Then I remembered something my wealthy stepfather once said. If someone's really wealthy and their nice car is in the shop, they're not going to accept a beat-up loaner. This guy drove a terrible car, and it didn't add up. Months later, he showed up in a nice Mercedes-Benz to take us out for dinner. That's when things clicked. I did some digging and found out he had convinced my mother-in-law to temporarily hold her house sale money in one of his bank accounts. My research revealed the truth. This man was broke, living with another woman, and subscribed to over 10 dating sites. He was conning women into giving him money. Story 24. When I was 19, I came home from college. My parents went on vacation for a week and asked me to house sit for 2 days. Both of my siblings were also away in other parts of the country. We lived way out in the countryside. We knew all our neighbors, good folk, but the nearest neighbor was almost a mile away. On the second night, I got this really strange feeling of uneasiness, which was weird because I grew up in this house and had been home alone many, many times as a teenager. But the feeling that something was going to happen was just incredibly strong. Overwhelming even. So I grabbed one of my dad's rifles and took it to my room upstairs. I loaded the rifle but did not cock it. I stood it in the corner next to my bed and went to sleep uneasy. I have never done this before or since. At around 3:04 a.m., I was awoken by someone in the house walking around downstairs. I heard them walk up the stairs. They came to the platform before my room, where there are 2 more steps. At this point, I quietly got out of bed, grabbed the rifle, got behind the bed, and aimed it at the door. I heard them climb those 2 steps to my room. As they started to turn the doorknob, I pulled the spring-loaded action to engage a round, which made a loud, audible click. I saw the doorknob turn back, keeping the door shut, and heard the person bolt down the stairs and run out of the house. After a while, I took the rifle and went room to room. But I knew they were gone. Nothing was missing or stolen. 24 years later, I have no idea who broke into our house and why, especially why they came to my room at 3 p.m. I'm just glad they didn't come in. If they had, they likely wouldn't be alive. But the weirdest part was still that overwhelming feeling I had the night before. Story 25. Not me, but my mom, when she started semi-truck driving about 20 years ago, she brought an orange and white cat named Little Boy with her. He was an amazing companion over the 17 years he was alive. He gave her company on the lonely roads, kept her motivated and laughing, and also protected her. Little Boy was a very friendly cat overall, so for most people who approached her truck, he was very chill. Except for this one guy. My mom saw him coming and immediately had a weird feeling. She's petite and short for the trucking industry, so she knows she can be a target. When the guy walked up and said hello, Little Boy became very upset. Poofy, spitting, growling. The works. My mom was shocked, but believed her cat and her gut. She politely talked with the guy about whatever he needed. He asked if he could check out her truck and made a joke about also having a grumpy cat. She declined and said she was busy before heading to another truck stop. Turns out, that guy had been going around mugging and attacking people. She's never had another experience like that in the industry, but her cat taught her to believe her instincts about people. To this day, she still does. Little Boy maybe acted like that 5 to 10 more times in his life, and every time my mom said she had a similar gut feeling. Trust your pets if they don't like someone. Story 26. I've had a few intuition moments, but honestly, the scariest one didn't actually happen to me. I was babysitting for a couple who were friends of my parents. The dad was a semi-truck driver. That morning, the mom was crying, really crying, and it was unnerving for both me and her husband because she was the kind of tough mom who never cried. She held on to him and begged him not to go to work. She didn't know why, just a feeling. When he asked me what he should do, I don't know why he asked me. I was only 19. I told him to trust his wife. I took the kids into their room and we played games for a while until the dad came in and said we were going out to dinner. I went with them and helped with the kids so the couple could have a kind of impromptu date night. The next morning, I got a call from the dad, thanking me over and over again. I finally got the full story. That morning, his driving partner had fallen asleep behind the wheel. The dad would have been sleeping in the back of the truck during that shift, but the woman who replaced him for the trip was napping in the front. That switch saved both their lives. The back of the truck had been completely caved in by another truck. When the partner woke up and slammed the brakes to avoid hitting the median, I've had my own close calls, but nothing has ever touched that moment. Story 27. It's not about me, but my mother possesses an extraordinarily powerful maternal instinct. Occasionally, I still consult her about how her intuition guides her before I undertake any risky actions. For example, when my brother and I were young, we wanted to become members of the local Boy Scouts. We noticed a man outside a grocery store registering kids, and we pleaded relentlessly with her to let us join. She refused, explaining that a group of adult men taking boys into the woods with minimal parental oversight didn't sit well with her. and she felt uneasy about the man handling the signups. A year later, the story broke in the news. Our specific chapter had been abusing children for over 20 years. When she saw that revelation, she completely lost her composure. Another time, my mom, grandma, cousin, and cousin's boyfriend were all at the beach with me. I wanted to ride home with my cousin and her boyfriend because I thought they were cool. My mom said no because they had been drinking. When I asked her again, she looked terrified and started yelling, "There is no way you're getting in that car." So I rode home with her and my grandma. Not long after, they got in a horrible crash. The boyfriend was in the back seat, but ended up upside down in the front passenger seat. The back of the car, where I would have been sitting, was completely destroyed. I would have died. One last very tragic example. One of my older cousins struggled with substance abuse. She and her husband had just had a baby. My mom was one of the first to see the child, even before my aunt. She immediately noticed something was wrong and told them both to take the baby to the hospital. They ignored her. The baby passed away less than 2 weeks later. Story 28. Back in the 2000s, I went camping with my now ex. After setting up our site, we drove to a trailhead for a walk in the woods before heading to a local store for supplies. There were clouds, but nothing threatening, and they seemed to be clearing. Still, I had a bad feeling, just a gnawing sense of dread. But I chalked it up to new place jitters. The deeper we went, the worse the feeling got. It felt like moving in a dream. Everything slowed down and heavy with doom. I said a few times that I felt weird, and my ex just thought I was being dramatic. But I kept pushing on since everything looked fine. Eventually, the unease reached a breaking point. My body locked up mid-step, heart racing, cold sweat, trembling. The works, I suddenly blurted out, "I'm not taking one more step unless it's to go back." I didn't plan those words. They just exploded out of me. My legs refused to move forward. As soon as I agreed to turn back, my body spun around and bolted. I've never run like that in my life. I'm not athletic and kind of clumsy. But that day, I dodged roots and jumped over logs effortlessly. My lungs burned, but the adrenaline kept pumping. It was like something primal was screaming, "Danger, go!" When the trees broke and I saw my car, I had my key ready. In one motion, I unlocked the door, jumped in, slammed it shut, and sat there panting, heart pounding. No clue why I was so terrified. My ex got in shortly after, looking annoyed, until out of nowhere, hail began pounding the car. In seconds, it went from partly cloudy to stormy chaos. Thunder, wind, branches snapping, and ice falling from the sky. We sat under the shelter until the hail passed, then drove 3 hours home in pouring rain. We returned to camp the next day. Not only had it hailed, but tornadoes had touched down. One tore up a century-old tree and crushed someone's new SUV. Our stuff was scattered and wet, but fine, except for the 5-pound bag of trail mix that raccoons had licked clean. That day taught me, when your gut tells you to run, run. I didn't know what was wrong, but something inside me did, and I'll never ignore it again. Story 29. I used to explore abandoned places. One day it was unseasonably warm for January. Nearly t-shirt weather, I had gone for a drive through the countryside by myself just to enjoy the sunshine. And at one point, I came across what looked like a former summer resort house or inn tucked in the woods. To access it, I had to park down the road and hike in. I entered through a window into a living room type space, then wandered around. The layout was kind of winding, with a lot of short corridors and small connecting rooms, like a kitchen with 2 doors, a hallway, a utility sink room, and a pantry. The place was in major disrepair. After finishing the first floor, I went up to the second. I had only just started walking around when I came near one of the rooms and felt something really dark about it. That feeling hit hard, the kind of instinct that says it's time to leave. I also suddenly realized how reckless I had been. Nobody knew where I was. My car was far off. I had no gear, no protection, no backup, nothing. I started heading downstairs at a pretty brisk pace. On the way to the exit, I glanced down at the floor. There was a film of condensation from the wild temperature changes. I could see my fresh footprints in the moisture, and a second set of footprints coming from one of the rooms following mine. That was honestly one of the last times I explored abandoned places. It was already hard to get friends to join me, and after that, I realized it was just too risky to keep doing it solo. Story 30. I never got confirmation about what he was planning, or if he was planning anything at all, but even if he was just trying to sell something, my gut told me to stay far away. It's the one time in my life where I remember feeling that kind of intense alarm. I can't explain it except to say, I just knew. I've struggled with anxiety, psychosis, poor impulse control, and addiction. But none of that compares to what I felt that day. I was about 6 years old. My sister, my neighbor, and I were playing with chalk on our driveway. My mom was inside, but the window was open so she could hear us. Then a big white utility van pulled up to the curb. The windows were blacked out. A man got out and approached us, asking if we wanted to come to his van and have some milk. He claimed he was another neighbor's milkman. My parents had taught me not to talk to strangers, but something deep in my gut told me this was serious. Alarm bells went off. I put my little sister behind me and begged my friend not to go. She went anyway, but I kept my sister with me. I hated milk anyway. Turns out I'm lactose intolerant, but that didn't even matter in the moment. The man started walking up our driveway toward us, and with every step he took, I backed up. I told my sister not to speak or move. We were pinned near the gate, and I had no idea what to do except shield her. I was ready to kick, scream, and bite if he touched either of us. I would have gone for his legs to make him fall, or clawed at his face if he touched me. Thankfully, my mom heard the interaction. She came flying down the stairs and out the door, yelling like I've never heard her yell before or since. I don't remember what she said, but the guy got defensive. She talked over him before he could finish a word. He huffed, turned around, and drove off without making any delivery to the neighbor he mentioned. My sister and I ran to my mom. My friend was upset she didn't get her chocolate milk, but she got over it. I'd like to believe maybe he really was a salesman or delivery guy. Maybe the delivery was farther down the street, but most of me still believes he had other plans. I never saw him again. That moment stuck with me. It's been around 14 years. As a side note, one of my mom's classmates had been abducted years ago and wasn't found until much later. So she was always very protective. And when I was 10, a similar tragedy happened in my city to a girl around my age. It shook everyone. Story 31. I lived in one of the poorer areas of a major city. Being poor myself, my block was usually fairly peaceful. This story is about the one time in the 5 years I lived there when it wasn't. I went out to grab some food from a nearby bodega. There were two bodegas near me, one just half a block away, the other a couple of blocks in the opposite direction. The first odd thing I noticed when I stepped outside was that nobody else was out. It was summer, and usually the streets were full of people hanging out. I had planned to go to the one farther away. It had better groceries, and I figured I'd grab a few extra things. But as I started walking, I noticed a group of 3 or 4 guys I didn't recognize standing on the corner. Something about it felt off. I didn't even consciously decide. I just turned and went to the closer bodega instead. As I was entering the store, gunshots rang out down the block. 2 people were shot. One of them didn't survive. The shooting happened exactly where I would have been walking at that moment. Story 32. I always told my daughter to trust her instincts. She had a friend in elementary school around 4th or 5th grade. We were sort of friends with the family, so we knew them pretty well. One night, my daughter was invited to spend the night at her friend's house. She came home, and everything seemed fine, until she was invited again and said she didn't want to go. I asked why, and she said the dad gave her the creeps. I started asking all the questions. Did he do anything to you, touch you, take you into a room alone, show you anything? She answered no to everything and just said he was creepy. I asked if she wanted her friend to sleep over at our house instead, and she said no. I didn't push it, but checked in over the next few weeks to see if anything inappropriate had happened. Nothing happened, so we eventually stopped hanging out with them. But it wasn't for that reason. Life just got busy with 4 kids. Fast forward 5 years, and the dad was arrested for child molestation. The wife divorced him. My daughter and I have talked about this incident a lot, and she always thanks me for listening to her. I always tell her that I couldn't ignore her when I had taught her to trust her gut. If I had forced that friendship, I would have been teaching her not to trust her instincts, and I didn't want to do that. So I trusted her gut. Story 33. I was at a mall with my mom, and we were about to leave when some people from a travel agency approached us and asked if we'd like to participate in a game. We agreed. The game consisted of scratch cards, some with prizes, some with nothing at all. They gave my mom one, and she didn't win anything. When it was my turn, I scratched off a card and won the best prize, a trip to 5 different destinations, all expenses paid. My mom couldn't believe it, and neither could I. They asked me to fill out a form, and what weirded me out was that I had to claim the prize at their office, which was across the parking lot and in the basement of the mall. For some reason, that gave me a weird feeling, adding to the strangeness. They were Colombian. We walked to the parking lot and I checked out their website. As a software developer, I noticed the domain name and overall design felt off. It gave me even worse vibes. I turned to my mom and said, "This gives me weird vibes. Let's leave." The guy was flabbergasted, but we left. It turned out it was a scam. When people arrived at their office, they made you sign documents and immediately charged you $700 to $800 on your credit card. A friend of a friend fell for it and had to pay. I just thank God that my gut feeling told me to leave and that my skepticism saved me that day. Story 34. My husband and I were coming home from our honeymoon, driving a long distance. Over 12 hours, we were most of the way home when suddenly traffic came to a dead stop out of nowhere. We stopped in time, but the cars behind us didn't. There were accidents happening all around us. We pulled to the shoulder and began checking on everyone, calling the police and doing all that we could. After about 30 minutes of being stuck on the side of the road, I had this feeling that we needed to be behind the guardrail. So I moved us there. Sure enough, just 5 minutes later, an 18-wheeler jackknifed and slammed into the guardrail just beyond where our car had been. The truck hit multiple cars. I probably wouldn't have been injured where I was initially, but I made my husband stay behind the guardrail with me after that. It was terrifying. Story 35. I used to go to a very small gym in a strip mall in a small town. Members could come and go at any time using a key code. There were no employees around, although cameras and cleaners came by occasionally. One night around 8 p.m., I arrived at the gym, and it was dark but not too late. There was a guy already there, lifting weights. I noticed another guy walking around outside on the phone. Shortly after, the guy inside left, and the man from outside came in. He didn't put in a code to get in, and I had never seen him before. He was wearing a polo shirt, jeans, loafers, and a baseball cap. Super casual, but definitely not dressed for the gym. He started messing around with a treadmill, but clearly had no idea how it worked. My gut told me to get out of there. We were alone, and he wasn't there to work out. I ran to my car and drove off so fast I didn't even have time to put on my seatbelt. I don't know what his intentions were, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I might have seemed rude, but I wasn't about to be on a Dateline episode. Story 36. I was heading home late from my college campus after studying for exams in the library until around 8 p.m. By the time I was walking to the bus stop, it was almost 9. I waited at the same stop I always used, and the bus arrived. As it pulled in, I noticed there were only 3 people on board. Not super uncommon for that time of night. But what really struck me was that 2 of the 3 passengers were staring directly at me, unblinking. When the bus driver opened the door, he did the same, just coldly and silently stared at me. It was incredibly unsettling. I got a weird gut feeling about the whole situation, so I waved him off and told him I forgot something and needed to head back, insisting they go without me. But the driver immediately responded saying, "No, you shouldn't go back. It's late. You can always get that thing tomorrow. It's quite unsafe out there at this time of night." It felt like he was trying to coax me onto the bus. I quickly walked away, heading toward a place I knew had a security camera and a campus SOS emergency button. After a few seconds, I heard the bus drive off, and the adrenaline really kicked in. I waited another 30 minutes until a different bus came. This one had more people and seemed normal, so I got on and made it home safely. A few days later, I saw a news report about a stolen bus from a depot. A crew of men had been using it to kidnap young adults, mainly college students, by pretending to be a regular driver with a couple of fake passengers to make it seem normal. Once inside, the victims were outnumbered and couldn't escape while the bus was moving. The story matched exactly what I experienced, and I was horrified to realize I could have been one of those victims if I hadn't trusted my gut. I still think about it every time I ride a bus late at night. Story 37. My friends and I were teenagers, hanging out at a park in Luxembourg on a hot summer day, smoking joints and drinking beers. Some random guys, also teens, just a little older, came over and asked if we wanted to try what they were drinking. This was pretty common. It's a small country, crime is low, and people share stuff casually, but something about these guys immediately felt off. I declined and told my best friend not to drink it either. Their energy was just wrong. A few friends in the group did take sips. I begged my best friend again not to, then walked a few meters away to bum a cigarette from someone else nearby. When I came back, I saw my best friend take a sip from the Malibu coconut bottle they'd handed her. I immediately told her we needed to leave. Now I had zero doubt in my mind that something was in that bottle. My other friend said I was overreacting, but I grabbed my best friend and rushed her toward the nearest Quick, the Belgian version of McDonald's. As we got closer, her speech started slurring and her legs were dragging. I was basically pulling her into the restaurant. In the bathroom, she was nearly paralyzed on the floor. I called her mother and told her everything. Thankfully, she turned out okay in the end. Looking back, it seems obvious, but at the time, on a warm summer day, carefree and used to sharing drinks, it didn't feel so clear, but something about those guys stood out right away. I'm so glad I followed that instinct and got her out of there. We're both adults now, and you can bet we no longer accept drinks from random people. Story 38. We had recently moved to another state. I was 12, and my little sister was 4. One afternoon, I was watching TV, my mom was napping, and my sister was outside in the fenced backyard playing in her sandbox. Out of nowhere, I heard, or maybe just strongly felt, "Go check on your sister." I looked toward the window, but I couldn't see the yard clearly from where I was sitting. I brushed it off, then I felt it again. Much more urgently, I jumped up, went outside, and she was gone. I ran around to the gate. It was wide open. I sprinted to the front yard, calling for her. As I got to the end of the driveway, I saw her, just barely, turning the corner at the end of the street, walking hand in hand with a man. A second later, and I wouldn't have seen her at all. I screamed her name, frozen in place. She let go of his hand and ran to me. She told me the man had come into the backyard and asked her to help him find his dog. It was terrifying. I brought her inside and woke my mom immediately. I don't recall her calling the police, and I still don't know why she didn't. I'll never forget that day, or how close we came to something horrific. Story 39. This wasn't scary in the traditional sense, but it was life-changing. Back in January, I started suspecting my wife was drinking again and having an affair. I tried to convince myself I was wrong. She had claimed to be 12 years sober, and I didn't want to believe she'd cheat. The night after a great date, she acted weird about coming to bed. She gave me her usual excuse. "I'm going to smoke and then I'll come to bed," but lingered just long enough for me to fall asleep. She seemed bothered when I asked her again to just come cuddle, gave me a half-hearted kiss and told me to go to sleep. As soon as I put my phone down, she stepped outside. I picked it back up to scroll, thinking I'd wait for her to come back in. Normally, I'd text her something funny or random while she was outside, but something told me not to this time. After about 30 minutes, I picked up my phone to text her, "You coming back in soon?" And I swear it was like the voice of God said, "Do not text her. Go outside now." It wasn't a thought in my head. It felt like a voice all around me. I got up and walked out like I wasn't even in control of my body. She wasn't outside smoking. Something told me to check the car. Sure enough, she was just getting out of it, with a drink in her hand. She looked startled, quickly hid the drink, and pulled out a can of Coke. I asked what it was, and she lied. "Just drinking a Coke." I reached into the car and pulled out a tall can of White Claw. She panicked, claimed she had just started drinking again, wouldn't answer questions. Instead, she kept texting, refusing to speak to me. I knew she wasn't texting friends. It was too late, and she wouldn't want them to know she was drinking. She passed out shortly after.